Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's book review time. Today we're going to take a look at 11th Cycle by Kian N. Ardalan. So 11th Cycle by Kian N. Ardalan is the first book in his new Mistland series, and it's his second published book overall after the fantastically underwhelming epic of a dead wizard and an average bard. It's also one of the most difficult books I've read in terms of putting together all of my thoughts for a review, but I'll do my best for you here. So we focus on 5 very different characters, and in this type of book it's always nice to see that not all of those point of view characters are human. In fact, of those 5 characters, only 2 of them are actually human, so it gives us probably a more than average amount of time spent in the heads or experiencing some of the different races that you have in this world. The POV structure is perhaps a little bit strange because 4 of the 5 that we do have are in the first person, and then the 5th one is in the third person. But the reason for this does make sense, and it works well in the context of the story. This 5th character is the 11th Seed. It's a powerful being born to bring about the end of a cycle and herald the beginning of a new one. It's a little bit of a strange creature because although to all outward appearances it's a full-grown being, it's a very tall and powerful looking creature, although it does have the ability to change its body basically at will. But inside it is most definitely a child with very little understanding of the world it finds itself in. It sets out looking to learn about emotions and seeking people to become the embodiment of feelings, kind of a champion of a select handful of emotions, if you will. So part of the story does focus on these emotions and shows us how some of the characters come to a place where they hit the requirements to become these champions of certain emotions, but they're not always obvious choices, both in terms of the people and of the emotions, so there is still the capacity within this for surprise. Now, in continuation of plot talk, I'll say that this is a grimdark novel, and the title of the series being Mistland kind of puts me in mind of a really dark and grim and hopeless place, but it's not that at all. There is light and there is love and there is hope, even in some circumstances when our characters are at their lowest point, but all too often the darkness is lingering just around the corner, and that contrast between the light and the dark really serves to make it even more brutal and unforgiving. There are content warnings in the book, but they're not necessarily highlighted as such. They appear in the foreword, so if you are someone who reads a foreword, just be aware of that. I have at least one friend who wouldn't normally read content warnings because they can act as spoilers for what you'll find in the book, of course, but she read the foreword and so came across them where she would normally look to avoid them. In terms of that content though, or some of the more, for me at least, extreme forms of it, there are some graphic sex scenes in this book which some people might find hard to swallow, and that does include some rather violent and descriptive rape. There's the usual gore that you might expect in this kind of dark fantasy book as well, but on top of that there's also some pretty harrowing dismemberment and I guess you might call it body horror, so this book is definitely not one for the faint of heart. So in what is a bit of an unusual point for me to make in one of my reviews, I would say there is quite a lot in this book not to like, especially in terms of the brutality and of the sexual violence that you'll find within the pages. But seeing the characters go through this and seeing them come out of the other side and how it affects them and how they change, sometimes physically as well as emotionally, was so enthralling that it added, if not a counterbalance, it added a counter-argument, I would say. The good doesn't necessarily outweigh the bad, but it addresses it in a way that doesn't shy away from the horrors that sadly appear in this world, and indeed in our own. Outside of that, it's a varied and wondrous world. There are plague knights who take away disease and inflict them upon those touched by their blades. There are giant kind of owl bears, and there are flying manta rays, as well as different races that you have characters from, such as the Akar and Zerubs. There are races that are at war basically because they've always been at war, and across all of this there are several different and very distinct types of magic as well. So there's obviously a lot of work that's been put into building this world, and it worked for me very well, with everything coming together to give us a vast landscape to explore and to enjoy. One last thing that I'll mention in isolation is about the audio, because I was lucky enough to be able to both read and listen to an advanced review copy of this book, and let me tell you, the audio was fantastic. There are two narrators here who I found to complement each other and the story very well. Despite the dark tone of much of the book, they provide a high point, a light point even, because the narration they provide is soothing and yet enthusiastic, and I found that it just really worked very well for me and definitely elevated my enjoyment of the book overall, and that definitely helped me to shape the rating I gave for this book, so I ended up on 4.5 stars out of 5 for 11th Cycle by Kian N. Ardalan. Now, to break that down a little bit for my weighted ratings, the enjoyment translated to a score of 17 out of 20. I definitely had a good time with this, but as I say, the audiobook heightened that enjoyment for me, as well as taking a much longer time to get through. I don't think I would have enjoyed the book quite as much if I'd have been reading it fully rather than being able to listen to it as well. For the world building, as I say, it's such a varied, vast and wondrous world. I gave this one 18 out of 20. There's so much work that's gone into it and it all works together really well. It all pulls together. There's nothing that's really out of place, although obviously in a story like this, there is so much that is weird and wonderful. Things like the giant flying manta rays, for instance, they just seem to fit this world though, so it all definitely works. For the characters, there were some absolute highs in here, a lot of it being down to the emotions and the turmoil that they go through and how they come out of it at the other end. I ended up giving 17 out of 20 here. And for the plot, I thought some of the storylines were perhaps a little bit basic or not really explained as fully as I might have liked, so I didn't really understand necessarily all of the motives of those characters, so I gave this one 16 out of 20. The writing style I thought was pretty good. There were no issues with it. Everything flowed quite nicely. It was very accessible, very easy to get into and get through, so I gave 8 out of 10. And likewise, the pacing was really good. There was a really nice balance between the faster and the slower parts. I gave this one 4 out of 5. And then finally, for the discretionary, I've given 2 out of 5 because it does have a really nice cover. Although it's a bit of a strange cover and I might not like the feature, I guess, of the artwork, the character that we have there, as much as some of the other ones that I've seen, I really like the colours and the overall design aspect of it, so that's a definite plus point. It's also got a nice map, it's got a glossary inside as well, sort of a character list / glossary combined, so some definite good points there. So overall, if you've been adding these up, that one gives 11th Cycle a total score of 82, which is a really, really good score, especially for a book which has got some real dark undertones to it and some aspects that I really didn't enjoy or wouldn't enjoy normally in isolation, but the way they were handled here I thought was very well done, and although some of those I might still call inexcusable, the rest of the story did kind of soften the blow a little bit from those. In the Hall of Fame, that leads to a rank of equal 31st. I've actually had quite a few titles recently in and around this score, so 2 of the titles that I read, I think it was the 2 titles that I read immediately before 11th Cycle, both also scored 82. I think it was 3 titles in a row, maybe 3 in 4 that I read that had that same score. So a really good end of last year and start of the current year for me in that respect. So those are my quick thoughts anyway on this nearly 800-page tome. If you have read this one, let me know what you thought of it down in the comments below. And of course, if you haven't got to it yet, because it doesn't come out until, I think it's is it the 1st or the 7th of February? I can't remember, I do apologise. If you haven't read it yet, let me know what are your thoughts, what are your expectations for it, or you're looking forward to making this one of your titles for early 2023. That's your lot for today, so thank you very much for joining me for this book review. I'll hopefully catch you in the next video sometime soon, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.